Hey guys, and welcome to Should You Buy It, where all we do is talk a little bit about the game and whether or not we think it's worth the cost.
In this episode, we'll be playing Going Medieval, the city builder colony simulator game where you will have to build castles, fight off bandits, and brave the elements in order to survive.
So the first question that we always cover in these videos is what stage of development is the game in? And in this case, Going Medieval is currently in early access and available on PC for $25.
So what exactly is Going Medieval? Well, Going Medieval is a colony simulator game that takes a large amount of inspiration from its predecessors such as RimWorld. The main twist that it tries to pull off, however, is the fact that you're playing in a 3D environment rather than a more traditional 2D one that we see in other games in this genre.
In Going Medieval, you will start each game by selecting what style of play you want. You are given 3 options here, which are Standard, Peaceful, and Survival. Standard is clearly what the game was balanced around, as it is exactly what you would expect from a colony sim. You start out with small attacks that will slowly increase in difficulty as you become more and more stronger. Then you have Peaceful, which simply just removes all enemy attacks, and then finally there's Survival. Now Survival will cause frequent attacks to happen that steadily increase in difficulty regardless of what your current strength is. That means if you lose a colonist, the next wave won't be a little bit easier to compensate, but instead will continue to get harder and harder the longer the game goes on.
Next up, you're going to choose your difficulty and starting scenario. The difficulties are pretty standard here, as the higher you choose them, the harder they get. It is worth mentioning that they added 5 difficulties rather than the standard 3 that you see in most games. Next is your starting scenario, which has your standard 3 colonists and a bunch of random resources to help you get started, or a more difficult option which allows you to spawn in alone with next to nothing in the middle of winter. Finally, if neither of these options sound too interesting enough for you, you are allowed to create your own scenario, which you choose the season, number of starting settlers, and what resources that you will begin with.
After that, you will be able to choose a starting location, which will change the terrain and resource layout that you have access to. Finally, we get to the best and last part of the game setup process, which is the character creation. This is where you will be able to re-roll colonists in order to get the stats that you desire. Maybe you feel it's important to have a good builder early on, or maybe you care more about being able to research quickly. This is the place to decide what is the most important thing for your AI to have. Every character will also come with separate pros and cons that they bring along with them. These are represented in the forms of perks and debuffs. They could include things like needing less sleep or maybe needing more food in order to help sustain them. There's all sorts of different ones. I think there's probably a good dozen, maybe even 2 dozen of them currently in the game. But either way, it's nice to see this small little addition as it adds more and more depth to the character customization.
Okay, so now that we're actually in the game, what's it like? Well, to be honest here, this is very similar to RimWorld in almost every way. Just to give you some examples here, you can give people job priorities, draft them into the military during attacks, queue up buildings to be built, make farming plots, queue up things like food and campfires, and so on. In other words, if you've played RimWorld, just take all the futuristic aspects of that game out, and you have Going Medieval.
So what does this game bring to the table that its predecessors didn't? Well, first and foremost is its 3D element. You see, each building can be built up with multiple floors going up or down depending on what you like to do. This means you could build one large tall building in order to house all your resources rather than just making a big wide flat area like you would in RimWorld. This also means that you're able to actually dig down into the ground. Now, ores like metal or iron will have to be found in the actual ground itself, so this will make sure that you need to have careful planning in order to make sure that you mine accordingly, as filling in these holes can be quite a pain. Then again, you may not want to fill in those holes, as you could build yourself a nice underground storage room or maybe a kitchen in order to help keep your food cold. I mean, it's not like we have freezers here, but digging down into the ground actually is a great way to create insulation for yourself, and it is a really nice mechanic to see that I certainly wasn't expecting in a game like this.
Now, aside from the 3D environment, we also have the game's research system. This was honestly really cool and interesting, as I've never really seen anything quite like it. The way this works is somewhat similar to research trees in other games, where you must research one thing in order to get to the next. However, the twist is that each time you research something, you will have to write it down in a book and then store said books. Once you have the knowledge, the books must be kept safe, otherwise you will actually lose access to that research. This means that if you get attacked and the attacks run off with a few of your books, you could end up losing several things that you've already unlocked. This creates a system where you feel as if you must protect your research at all costs, or risk getting sent back to the Stone Ages.
The last mechanic this game currently brings to the table that was unique was its religion system. This is pretty straightforward, as your settlers have 2 different religions and will want to pray at an altar every so often. At the moment, this basically just boils down to a second relaxation or maybe a happiness meter you might see in other games. But I do have high hopes for the religion system, as I can see there could be many different aspects to the game that they could add that would be both unique and interesting, so I'm definitely looking forward to see what they do with it.
So now it's time for the pros and cons section for the video. First up for the pros is that the 3D element was just a cool idea. I can't say I've played many, if any, colony sims that included verticality in its structures. Usually you just have a flat area to work with, so this was definitely a huge improvement compared to its predecessors. Next up for the pros was that the research system was super innovative. Once again, Going Medieval delivered on its innovative thinking when it comes to the genre. Rather than just having the stereotypical research tree that you slowly progress down, they took the idea of a research tree and added an amazing twist. That of course being the fact that your research can be stolen or even degraded if it's not protected. And finally for the pros is that seasonal changes forced you to change the way that you played. Now I don't just mean that there were different seasons, as that's pretty standard for a colony sim. What I mean is that the seasons will force you to dramatically change your playstyle. Just to give you an example, if you don't store your food underground, it will rot away during the summer and winter months. Not to mention that the workers don't want to work when the sun is high up in the air due to overheating during the summer.
Now for the cons. First up is that the game is just missing a lot of important gameplay aspects, like taking prisoners or using the world map for an example. I do know they plan on adding a lot more to this game before it does come out in full release, but in its current state it is just missing a lot of major gameplay aspects that I know would add a ton of replayability and differences between each game playthrough that would make this game significantly better. Next up is that this game just doesn't have many interesting events. I mean, there's a whole event where it's like, oh, Thor's thunder hammer is now striking down, and it basically just lights a couple trees on fire or burns them down, and that's it. I mean, aside from that, all your events are going to be, hey, this random guy ran into your area, do you want to save him? If you do, you'll get attacked in a few days, and that's about it. I mean, yeah, there's just events that are just, hey, you're attacked. I think there was one where a bunch of wolves spawned in and just kind of sat at the edge of the map and then ran away. But at the end of the day, the events are definitely lacking. Although I am glad it's in the game, they definitely need to improve this system in order for it to actually add value. Finally, for the cons is that there are some major balance issues with things like the rate at which items degrade. For an example here, you wouldn't necessarily expect stone to degrade if you leave it out in the wilderness, or maybe wood if you leave it out there for a day or so. I don't know about you, I could understand the food doing this, but aside from that, things just degrade remarkably quickly if you don't store them indoors. And then food on top of that degrades even quicker during the winter months, so fast in fact that it's almost impossible in order to survive them without using a specific food that's known as smoked meat in order to get through that time period. So I would really like to see some balance issues change. There's also some combat balance issues. There's some AI pathing balance issues. Just a whole bunch of balancing around the board. I mean, I know this is early access, but it's definitely something that needs some major work.
So now it's time for the rating for the game. And when we rate games, we want to get 1 hour of enjoyment out of every $1 that we spend on the game. So for this game in particular, in Going Medieval, we would want to get roughly 25 hours of enjoyment out of the $25 that we spent. And after putting 24 played hours into this game, we give it 6 out of 10 potatoes.
Yeah, honestly, Going Medieval is a good game. It just has some major flaws that it needs to have fixed and some major content that it needs to have added. Once they do that, I think this game could definitely be really high up there with RimWorld in its rating, and I think it could even compete with the best of the best like RimWorld itself, and many other colony sim games in order to be dominating the genre. However, at its current state, in its current situation, it just has too many issues, it has too many balance problems, and it just doesn't have enough gameplay and replayability value in order to warrant it being a super valuable game. So in this case, with Going Medieval, we feel it is safe to say that it is probably worth the cost.
Now, if you guys want more money-saving content, consider subscribing to our channel, where we release new videos every single week, where we spend the money so you don't have to. If you're interested in becoming part of our community, then check out our Discord channel, and as always, thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time.